Now the cast of characters is assembled once again. Now the costumes and settings have been taken from memory storage and refurbished anew. Now the orchestra strikes the first resounding chord of the overture. The curtain is about to go up. Atlantis is rising.
In 2012, young couple Ihsahn and Elisa York masterminded and executed a daring plan to produce the stylish film noir script that Ihsahn and his brother Rakim wrote called The Murder Roulette. Through sheer force of personality, the couple mobilized a movement that captivated and inspired so many, and took the Hollywood establishment by storm. But as with any epic drama, our heroes would be tested through tragedy and loss, as would the idealism that brought so many to this cause. Now, in 2023, the Yorks are here in Palm Beach, Florida, to finalize investment contracts for a media business venture called Cinema Noir. In their family retreat, away from the day-to-day responsibilities of life in their home of North Carolina, Ihsahn and Elisa York embrace the temporary calm and solitude. Their eldest son is now out on his own, but there are still 6 children living under their roof. I've noticed that the kids closest in age tend to pair up. It's heartwarming to see these smaller alliances interacting somewhat independently within the larger family structure. At times, the York home can seem constantly on the brink of a joyful mayhem upon which they thrive. But there is an unrest in the York household. There is an unfulfilled mission to carry out, an assignment that demands fulfillment. Ihsahn, at one time a stage actor and independent filmmaker, has been given an opportunity to revise a screenplay that he and his brother Rakim wrote years ago called The Murder Roulette. I'm documentary filmmaker Mike Pulcinella. I created the original documentary about the journey to making this film, a story that touched and excited people in and out of the movie industry with its promise and potential, telling a story of loss, hope, and rebirth through the lens of their very personal and often extraordinary lives. Recently, I spent a few days with the House of York, reconnecting with the family and seeking to understand what had happened in the time between the making of the first Murder Roulette documentary and now. I found myself wondering, what is the relevance of the Murder Roulette project today? Why revisit this project now? Certainly, a lot has happened to this country and the world since that time. The need for new leadership and course correction is becoming more and more apparent and sharply pronounced than we could ever have anticipated back then. So why, as Ihsahn seems to be on the precipice of making his dream a reality, do we need this story more than ever before? The Murder Roulette is different from most movies being made in Hollywood today. It's a stylish crime thriller in the tradition of the French New Wave movement and the classic film noir of the 40s, but with a very modern flair. The pace is quick, the plot unpredictable. In The Murder Roulette, lives are lost, alliances are betrayed, and motivations are exposed. What begins as a simple heist movie develops into something else entirely, taking us down a path that is simultaneously fascinating and terrifying for what it reveals about human nature. What was it about the script or the story that really stood out to you at that time?
I remember being captivated by the screenplay because it had all the elements of a good film. It had action, drama, it was a psychological thriller, and it really reminded me of the Alfred Hitchcock cinema noir genre. And what was really interesting was it had a plot twist at the end that you weren't expecting. And I remember it being just a film that I would really want to see.
We started off with index cards, and we would write out certain ideas. And then we went from the index cards to fleshing out the treatment, and then the first draft, and the next thing you know, we had a script.
One of their first cinematic inspirations arrived in 1977, when the brothers saw Star Wars for the first time. Star Wars demonstrated the melding of escapist cinema with powerful mythological themes in a way that resonated with the young Ihsahn, although it would be years before he realized the true scope of it. When asked about the genesis of his filmmaking obsession, Ihsahn begins, quite characteristically, as you'll come to see during the course of this documentary, with a parable.
When Albert Einstein was 5 years old, his father gave him a compass. He was so intrigued by the needle and the invisible forces behind it that it led him down the path of his destiny. They call it a primal curiosity. So what I believe is that people are born, they have in their DNA not only the color of their eyes, how tall they're going to be, but their purpose. And when someone comes in contact with something like a compass, their DNA explodes and it sends them down the path of their destiny.
Soon after seeing Star Wars, the brothers decided to make their own film, albeit with some fairly primitive equipment.
My brothers and I found an old camera, and luckily the corner store sold Super 8 film. So we were able to purchase a roll. We went out in the backyard and we would shoot martial arts films. Run out of film, we'd have to go back to the corner store a week or two later when we got the money and buy another roll of film, shoot. And maybe over a month, we finally pieced about a 5-minute film together. And that was the start of our purpose and leading us down the path of trying to become filmmakers.
But Ihsahn and his brothers were growing up in a time and place where opportunity, if it existed, was often denied. It was the 1980s, and many families were facing social distress in poverty-stricken cities all over the country. But especially here, people felt threatened. They were underemployed and overlooked. During this time, the use of crack cocaine was spreading widely and brought with it increased levels of violence, chaos, and crime. Raised in a tense and unstable environment, to the brothers, the idea of becoming filmmakers in Hollywood seemed distant and unreachable.
The epidemic really crushed the spirit of the people and the city, and they only could really think about survival and not really dream of a better future.
Out of the lawlessness and the chaos, there often emerges individuals who grasp onto something in the hope that this thing will be their escape. For Ihsahn and his brothers, it was the love of books and films. The search for greatness became their motivation.
Whenever you study the hero's journey, there's always a point where the hero finds some sort of, let's say, a sword or technology, something that's going to help him along his journey, something he's going to need that's going to help him build his story. To me, that sword was the books and it was the knowledge.
Ihsahn soon realized that his greatest asset would be his mind, which he would have to do everything in his power to develop. He immersed himself in a huge range of literature, escaping to the vivid world of words and imagination.
I was feeling a growth in power. My thoughts gained a different dimension. I began to adapt the speech and mannerisms of the characters I was reading about in the books. I studied Emerson. I studied Nietzsche. I studied Sufi mystics, a range of various philosophers and thinkers. Heraclitus, he was one that spoke personally to me. He had this principle that he called the Logos. Now, the Logos, according to him, was the universe. It was alive and it was intelligent. And it would feed you its secrets. It would give you its confessions if you were seeking knowledge and wisdom. But what Heraclitus felt is that most people were so blinded by their own prejudice, they were so blinded by their own beliefs, their opinions, that they could never line themselves up to this Logos. And that kept them from really understanding what was going on out in the world. Now, he believed that everybody was capable of having sound wisdom and sound knowledge, but it didn't come from just reading books, and it didn't come from a mentor, and it didn't come from academics. It came from experience, and it came from something within. That really moved me. And I always had this conception that if you were going to do anything, if you were going to change the world in any way, it was going to have to come from within.
In the period that followed, Ihsahn spent much of his formative years in the company and guardianship of wise and learned scholars, elders, and educators, one of whom was the former Seattle and DC TV news anchor, John Ray.
I went to undergraduate, graduate school, went to Columbia University, graduate school of journalism, all of that stuff. I didn't learn anything about you could use your mind to create the kind of reality you want to create. I didn't learn any of that. I mean, my major professor was the former president of CBS News, Fred Friendly. I was taught at Columbia University by the best, but I never heard anything about if you control what you allow to stay on your mind, you control what show up in your life. This is powerful knowledge. And when you give it to people, you are responsible for whom you give this to, because what they do with it reflects back on you. I gave it to him because I knew that there was a certain spirit that he had, and that I could trust him because I knew that it was destined for people like that.
When I'm trying to figure out how to maneuver this thing called life, I had these friends that were, even though they may have been dead for 100 years, their spirit lived on in these books. Yeah. Now, if they hadn't put their thoughts down, on paper, how would I have been, moved or affected by it?
He had this loyalty about him. He had this way of carrying himself. And see, I picked up on his spirit. See, they don't tell you that the most powerful thing that a human being has is spirit. That's your character. So spirit knows spirit.
The books became like a sword. It became an armor. It gave us an advantage, an escape, that we were able to go into different worlds, into invisible worlds, into creative worlds, and we were able to somehow nourish still, those dreams that we had inside.
The intuitions that ancient mystics and his modern-day mentors had been teaching Ihsahn to tap into and recognize transformed into an actual voice that led to a meeting which would clarify his destiny.
My friend and I were walking in the hallway in school, and I remember something, it was like a voice in my head just told me to turn around. And at the time, I could never, it just stuck out to me because it was a distinct voice that said, turn around. Years I've questioned, what was that voice? What was it that I heard that sounded like such a separate part of myself that has guided me throughout my life? And when I turned around, she was at the far end of the hallway, and the only thing I saw was a blurry silhouette. But what I really saw, what I saw with my third eye, what I saw with my heart was, all that I needed to see. And I fell in love at that moment.
At the time, my father was ill, and he had been ill for many years. And so I would pray. I would actually pray at night for him to get better, and at the time he couldn't walk. And so I'd pray for him to be able to walk again. When that wasn't happening, and he seemed to be getting more ill, I really started to question whether prayer worked, whether what I had believed in was something that actually could save him and make him better. And so when Ihsan came along, he really did bring me a lot of answers to spiritual questions I had. And that was surprising because he was so young.
When we would talk, I would explain to her things that I was reading and revelations that had come to me through these books. As she helped me to grow into the man I became, I felt in some ways I helped her and expanded her mind to the knowledge that I had sought, and that helped me to become the person I became.
When we met, it was almost like we were picking up where we left off from wherever that was. And so it really did feel like a homecoming. And at my age, I didn't really understand why it felt that way or what it meant, but it did feel like, oh yeah, I remember you, we're together again, yeah. And so when I met him, I really did just feel this sense of peace, like I had arrived home and we were now together again.
It was during this time that Elisa and Ihsan fell deeply in love. And very quickly they discovered they were going to have a son. Energized to make the most of this blessing, Ihsan had to make some difficult choices.
I held my son, and I remember looking at him when he was an infant, a couple days old, home from the hospital, and I'm staring in his eyes. And what I see is not somebody who just came into the world. I see something deep. I see depth. I see lifetimes that we shared. And no one could tell me that there wasn't something spiritual that was back behind my son and my relationship. I had to start taking life real serious. I had a son now. I made the choice right there to drop out of school just to meet Rakim in Chicago so we could start the film production company.
Ihsan relocated from Cleveland to Chicago to join Rakim. There they started a film production company called Art of Darkness Filmworks. Building the business from the ground up, they enjoyed much early success producing and directing music videos, commercials, and stage plays. It was here that Ihsan met the acting coach Jane Brody and producer Ron Thompson, both of whom were about to have a profound influence on the path his life would soon take.
I grew up poor, with no advantages of any sort. I really identify with the state school kid, with the kid who's trying to make his way. I mean, I was working at the age of 14 in a dime store, so I had not dissimilar background. So I always looked at people who weren't necessarily going to get a shot because they didn't have the financial background or the vision in their background to see what could happen, where they could go, what they could do. So when you meet someone like that who's got this potential depth, especially at the age of 18, some sort of gravity about them, you kind of pick up on that. I mean, it's like, wow, okay, I see who this is. Fine, let's do this.
So I was very impressed by how together they were, young but presenting themselves much more maturely than a lot of people their age. And the fact that they had such a spirit about them, such a force, they were going to make this happen,
Rakim and Ihsan were so close, and Ihsan trusted Rakim very much.
One of the brothers' first major achievements in Chicago was producing the play The Indian Wants the Bronx, starring Ihsan.
I remember being very proud that he would get it produced. I mean, that takes such chutzpah to get a show up, especially at that time in Chicago. It wasn't as easy as it is now. And then that he knew what script to do, that they used the stage in an interesting way. I bought what he was selling.
I first found out that Ihsan was a brilliant actor when he did stage plays in Chicago. And he just was able to draw the audience in, and they would follow his every move on the stage. And I was just amazed at how taken they were by him, and they wanted more.
Having been influenced by noir films such as Stanley Kubrick's The Killing,
I figured the loot on this deal at $2 million. There should be that much in the track offices.
Jean-Pierre Melville's The Red Circle, and the psychological thriller Angel Heart. They set out to write their own screenplay. They titled it The Murder Roulette.
When we stepped on the scene with doing our first music video and our first play, everyone knew that our talent was going to be undeniable. I have to say this about Rakim. Rakim was a mini Orson Welles. And at that time in Chicago, we were looked at as the young prodigies that were going to be the next big thing. And there was no doubt about it.
The brothers funded most of the film. The shoots were fast-paced and grueling. The money often ran out, but it was an exhilarating time for the fledgling filmmakers. With each late-night shoot, with each review of the dailies, with scene after scene completed, buzz about the project grew. Their vision was becoming a reality.
There was a true childlikeness about it that inspired everybody. You know, you're inspired to be around them.
A trip organized by Ron Thompson to the set of Hoodlum to meet the director Bill Duke further lifted their spirits and reinforced in the brothers' minds that they were getting closer to their goal.
Bill Duke at that time was the first black director that had been given the highest budget to do a studio film. The purpose of the meeting was for them to come on as executive producers to be that bridge into Hollywood. So we got our pass to go to the set. And again, it was like the same energy. Everybody on the set knew that we were about to do something big in Chicago and welcomed us.
Bill was as impressed as I was. He too, when he met them, said, wow, you know, these are special people.
At that time, I thought we were on top of the world, you know? It's like everything we were asking for was being given.
Blessing added to blessing as Isan and Elisa's third child was born, a beautiful girl they named Elena. Their family was growing, just as they wanted. But soon it became apparent that something was wrong. Elena had been born with a hole in her heart that had gone undetected until it was too late. On the morning of December 15th, 2000, Elena died in her sleep.
The doctor was upstairs delivering another baby, and he didn't know that Elisa was so close to giving birth. You know, her water had broken and everything. He thought there was still a little bit of time. So he called down and told the nurse to go ahead and give her the pain injection, you know, without monitoring that she was like on her way out. So when she was delivered, she wasn't breathing.
I remember putting the kids to bed, and after a while, maybe midway through the night, I remember being abruptly awoken by an apparition of my father. He was actually in his military uniform in the doorway of my bedroom. And I just remember it seemed so realistic, like he was actually standing there. Then I just went back to sleep. And early that morning, maybe around 5 a.m., I woke up to Elena not breathing.
Their families were at a loss to know how to help the grieving couple. It was John Ray who helped put Elena's passing in perspective.
Death is not the end of life. It's just an extension of life. And when you come to the realization that it is something that we all must experience, but It's just a transition. Because see, the body leaves here, but spirit is eternal. So you always have the spirit present. So we look at the body, we get all broke up and depressed because the person's gone. But the spirit is here, it never dies.
The most precious gift bestowed upon a man is fatherhood. These kids taught me the meaning of unconditional love. The simple fact of existence was all that was needed to be loved. I was loved because I was their father. And nothing on earth is more sacred than that.
Ihsaan and Elisa's lives were shattered. Production on The Murder Roulette shut down and was eventually abandoned. Jane Brody, drawing from her experience in the business, had some strong advice.
We found it to drop out because you're doing emotional gymnastics. And if you've got a sore knee, you know, if you broke your leg, you broke your leg, especially when such a primary relationship, because it's all primary relationships, a daughter. There can be no worse pain than that. So there would be no way that he could safely, I think, move into his emotional life for anything without it hooking in. At least that's how I feel about it, because the images will just be too strong.
So the advice you gave to him at that time was?
Yeah, don't act.
There was something missing. There was something missing from him. I wanted to see more. I was hoping there would be more, but just a real sadness, a real loss.
It has to be processed. Now, as we all know, you lose a parent, you lose a child, you'll never fully get over it, but it becomes handleable.
With about 80% of the film complete, Ihsaan relocated his family to the more serene environment of the South. It was here that the next chapter of Elisa and Ihsaan's life began, and the murder roulette was left behind.
Ernest Becker, The Denial of Death. That's like, a classic illustration of how humans cope with death. So I don't know how much you know about that, but it's humans being able to cope with their impending demise. So what we do is we psychologically set up things in our mind to keep death at bay. A lot of people's religion, this is heaven, going to heaven. Some people, it's a political cause. It's attaching yourself to something where you feel that you're making a significant change or you're important in some way to something. When you do have to look at death in the face and you realize that you are not going to live forever, then something happens within the human where they feel like now it's about legacy. Now, since I know that the realities hit me, I know that I'm not going to live forever. Now I have to do something that's heroic. I have to leave a mark. I have to leave a legacy.
And so you're living through such a primal story. He was, with the death of his daughter and his having to realize, my ego. I've not been living right in a way. He may have been living perfectly well, but he had to come to that and then realize what death means and how vital he is to the world and how vital he is to his family first.
You can read as many books as you want. You can try and take as many philosophies and different points of views. But when you actually really go through something, that's when all that is supposed to come to the forefront. Have you internalized what you've read? Have you internalized what that philosopher was trying to tell you about death or was trying to tell you about life or the rebirth process? And I had to question everything I knew up to that point. And I just wanted to become bigger than that tragedy, I wanted to become better than that moment.
Leaving Chicago and the creative life behind, the Yorks relocated to North Carolina to find a more consistent way of living, investing in real estate. There, they met Bob Robbins, one of the most successful real estate brokers in Winston-Salem. Bob was reluctant to give real estate advice to just anyone. But once he met Ihsan, he changed his mind.
He came into the office and sat down with his wife, and we discussed a few things, and he asked a few questions, and after a while I could see a drive. I could see a fire in his eyes. He wanted what I had. He wanted what he could work for, and he didn't expect me to give it to him. He expected me to give him the ideas and to put him in contact with the right people. And once I did that, then he just blossomed.
Within a short time, Ihsan had started a real estate enterprise of his own. Along the way, he and Elisa learned much about business, money, and investing.
Bob immediately felt the importance of what this was to me, and he took me under his wing and started helping me to make my first investments.
This was a time of increase, improvement, and comfort for the Yorks. The real estate business was taking off. Their family continued to grow.
I have to admit that those were some of the funnest years of our life. We had the financial freedom, we had a foundation. We were able to come and go as we please.
Throughout this time, Ihsan also continued to pursue a path of physical self-improvement. Inspired by the great philosophers and great leaders from the past, he was applying all of this new and exciting knowledge to creating success for himself and his family.
Yeah, this is for the haters. Hey yo, man, no, it's the same old, same old. Don't matter if you winning for the fame or you lay low. Haters gon' hate, but it's okay though. The aim is make sure the payroll stays swole. Big faces, cake dough, and the Neros. Rubles, yin yang, euros, and pesos. 7-digit figures trying to make more zeros. Spray holes in whoever in the way, so. These streets, with my mind on my plan. It's alright if you don't understand. I walk these streets like I got a gun in my hand.
I didn't think anything about the art. I didn't think anything about the movie. I wasn't thinking about acting at all for those years. After a while, of investing and working on the dollars and the cents and the numbers, it started off as a small whisper, Do you see yourself doing this forever? How do you impact the world by investing in homes? How much money can you accumulate, before it doesn't mean anything? And eventually that whisper became bigger and bigger until it became somewhat of a roar.
With the help of his good friend, real estate and investment banker Ron Sankey, the long-shelved Murder Roulette script made its way into the hands of a Hollywood casting agent named Veronica, who instantly recognized its quality. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic, and took Ihsan somewhat by surprise.
I was just curious. I wanted to see what she thought about it. So, I went down into our basement and dug through all these boxes and, pulled out the script and had 10 years of dust on it. So, okay. And I sent it to her. She got it, said she was going to read it over the weekend. I got the email Monday, and she started asking me all these questions like, why are you not in Hollywood? Why are you and your brother still not writing?
How did that make you feel when she said that?
It started making me feel like I let myself down in some ways, that after so much time had elapsed, that script was still getting that same reaction. She said, I don't know why you guys were doing it as an independent film. This story is strong enough for somebody like Denzel Washington or Morgan Freeman. Go straight to one of those two because this story has the potential to capture their attention. It's that good.
Ihsan went to see Ron Thompson. He was relying heavily on Ron's advice, Ron being a Hollywood producer himself and having personally known Morgan throughout his career. Ron was intrigued by the idea.
Ron Thompson said, man, that's a brilliant idea. Not only would Morgan fill the screenplay, but he'd also fill your personal story. So Ron advised me not to stop until I got a face-to-face with Morgan. thus began the journey to, get Morgan, aboard on this project. At the time, the only way that you could get a movie produced was you had to have an A-list actor, not a B-list, not a C-list. You had to have an A-list actor attached to your project. And that was the only way films were getting funded at that particular moment. So it was important for us to tie ourselves in with somebody like that, somebody of that stature.
We knew we had to have an A-list actor in order to get the film produced. And I always respected Morgan Freeman as an actor, especially after we saw him in a film called Street Smart. And after that, I really thought he would be ideal to play the role of Leo in The Murder Roulette. So we knew we had to somehow make that happen.
Morgan Freeman is represented by one of the most esteemed agents in Hollywood, Fred Spector. Clint Eastwood, Robert De Niro, and Danny DeVito were just some of the big names he had handled. Spector was legendary, and Isan and Elisa quickly realized that they needed to appeal to Mr. Spector in order to see if Morgan would be interested in this project.
So we sent the screenplay to Fred to see if we would get any traction to Morgan. The script got thrown right in the trash. We even hired a lawyer, a big-name lawyer in Hollywood. He wrote a letter of introduction, told Fred that we had $1 million in an escrow account. And when it was sent, it got thrown straight into the trash. Without even being opened, it got thrown straight into the garbage can. So we were like, okay, we're gonna have to come up with game plan 2.
Elisa then did some research and discovered that Morgan Freeman's business partner was a man named Bill Luckett. Bill was the co-owner, with Morgan, of Ground Zero Blues Club in Clarksdale, Mississippi.
I felt like Bill Luckett would be instrumental in getting us to Morgan because Bill Luckett was Morgan's right-hand man. He was his partner in business, and he was his best friend.
So she called Bill Luckett and told him what we were trying to do, and Bill invited us down to Mississippi and said, yeah, why don't you come down here, let's meet in person.
The Yorks drove the 14 hours from North Carolina to Mississippi. There they charmed the elders of Clarksdale. Bill was impressed with the couple's ambition and gave them some strong advice.
We sat across from Bill at the Blues Club. I pitched to him what our vision was, what our idea was, why I thought that Morgan would fit in this project. He said, I'll tell you this. Morgan sits here, right here where we're sitting, in the back of this Blues Club, and he'll go through a stack of screenplays this high. And I watch him. He'll open up one, go through 3 pages, and he'll toss it. Next one, 3 pages, toss it. And he goes through this stack of scripts, just reading and tossing, reading and tossing. And he said, you're not gonna have any type of luck unless you're able to make your screenplay stand out. So when we drove back home from Mississippi, that's all that rang in my mind. How do I make this screenplay stand out? I had this idea that if Morgan is so numb to screenplays, then perhaps it shouldn't be the screenplay I should sell. Maybe it should be our story. And I felt that if I was able to express, the dream, the passion of our dream, if I was able to, articulate the circumstances that we grew up in, the obstacles that we had to overcome, that Morgan would look at that story and he would say, that's a story worth telling. And that the Murder Roulette screenplay, it was just an extension of that.
And that's when I became involved. Making the Murder Roulette documentary was an exhilarating journey. By the end of it, I thought we had a unique and intimate look into the spirit of a family that seemed to be destined for greater things.
After we completed the documentary, we had a 45-minute story that I think impacted a lot of people. Not only was it it told a personal story, but it told an inspirational story. It told a story of hope. And I noticed that people not only resonated to the story because it was our story, but they resonated with the story because they saw their story.
I wasn't used to being on camera or having cameras around the house or even being a subject of a documentary. But in the end, when I saw how impactful it was really rewarding to see how people really resonated with our personal story.
So we started sending a documentary out, and what went from a small, intimate project started growing into a movement. And the more and more people that saw it, the more this thing started snowballing into something really, really powerful.
Touched and inspired by the Yorks story, Bill Luckett made sure that he got the documentary into Morgan's hands and encouraged him to watch it. The next day, Ihsan got a cryptic email.
Morgan saw it, called Fred, we'll talk.
After Morgan reviewed the material, he was really impressed, and he got in contact with his agent at CAA, Fred Spector, right away to have him review the material and get in contact with us.
So I think I talked to Bill Sunday or Monday, and this is what Bill relayed to me. They played golf, came back to the office. Bill opened up the email. It's like, Morgan, have you seen any of this? Do you know about the murder roulette? Morgan saw some of the material, and he called Fred, his agent Fred, right on the spot. I was like, what do you know about the murder roulette? Now remember, Fred, we had sent it to him. We tried to go the correct route that we were supposed to. So we did, the proper protocol.
Fred was really tough and direct. But I think in retrospect, what he was really trying to do was he was just trying to do his job. He was trying to see who we were. He was trying to see if we could produce or feature film. And I think he was really offering us an opportunity. But going through the back door of Hollywood through an A-list actor's best friend had its own unique set of consequences.
Again, we talk about the ancient stories. There's always what's called a threshold guardian, and that was Fred. He was just that threshold guardian, And he had to take us to the initiation. Are we going to cross over the portal? Are we going to cross over to the land of milk and honey? There's always that character in the story. So Bill said, look, man, at this point, you're as far as you've gone. The gates of Hollywood are open. If you're going to get Morgan, then you're going to have to play the game. There's no going around Fred anymore. You got to face the threshold guardian. You're either going to defeat him or he's going to defeat you. But right now, there's no way around it.
For months, even a year, Ihsan and Elisa had been working towards this moment, positioning, strategizing, calculating. They were at the high-stakes table now. The next test would be how their project and their vision would hold up in Hollywood.
Fred Spector called me at my home.
Hi, Ihsan. Fred Spector calling. Please give us a call back at 424.
You have somebody who's working on the biggest budget motion pictures in Hollywood. They're calling us in, North Carolina.
Hi, Alyssa. I have Fred Spector calling. Please give us a call back at 424.
I thought about what Bill Luckett said, and I have to embrace this moment. There's no getting around this. So I called the CAA.
Creative Artist Agency.
I guess I got a 12 o'clock meeting with Fred Spector.
Please hold.
So Fred's assistant answered. It's like, Fred Spector's office. And I was like, yes, my name is Ihsan York. I have a 12 o'clock with Fred Spector. And he was like, Ihsan, Fred has been expecting this call. He's on another line. I need you to hold on. Put him on hold. And when I heard that Fred was expecting your call, that's when I was like, this has all become real.
That's big.
So that's when my stomach dropped at that point. That's when it dropped. But then when he got back on the line and he was like, okay, stay near your phone. I need you to call me back in exactly 60 seconds. Fred's going to clear all lines. We got off the phone and I was like, wow. Hold on, wait, well, 1 second, hold on. He's about to clear the lines for me? The chest puffed up a little. If Fred Spector It's clear in the lines for me, he must have seen something or Morgan must have told him something. Because in Hollywood, you don't clear lines for just anybody. So Fred and I got on the phone and we started negotiating, how this was going to happen. And I always explain it to people like this. It felt like one of those gangster movies. And they hold them over the edge of the building and the person's flailing and they pull him back. Hold him over, the person's flailing and they pull him back. And I remember saying to Fred, I was like, Fred, I need you to listen just 1 second. Imagine this script being like Training Day was to Denzel. What if this did this to Morgan's career like it did to Denzel's career? And it was quiet like this. I remember being on the phone because I was waiting for him to retaliate, and it was quiet. I was like, this is my opening. This is where I can pitch it. And I was able to bullet point everything I wanted to say, all that's leading up to this point. And he listened.
What Fred wanted us to do was to produce a budget, to choose a director, and basically create a proposal for he and Morgan to sit down and review.
Tell you this, I'd like to see the budget, number one. I want to see what you budgeted for the director and for the other actors, etc. There's no way I would have this Morgan involved in this unless his company produced it, and that would be entirely up to him.
It was really astonishing because we came out of nowhere, and we presented our project to an A-list actor. He took it to his agent, which is one of the most respected agents in Hollywood, and they were giving us an opportunity. I mean, how often does that happen?
You have a chance to watch the DVD. I'm more than happy to do that. We can talk further after I've had a chance to look at it. Thank you, Fred. I appreciate your consideration. Anytime.
When Fred and I were on the phone and the negotiation stopped, he said, I'm going to tell you this. If you bring the money to the table, it's your project. But if Revelations Entertainment has to finance this, then it becomes ours. So if it becomes ours, you may not have a say in it.
From its inception to this moment, the Murder Roulette script had come so far against so many odds, only to be dangling on the brink of success. And yet, here it was, so many years later, and the movie hadn't been made, even after our original documentary had powerfully touched so many hearts and gotten the attention of Morgan Freeman. I found myself wondering what had happened. Everything had seemed like it was coming together. As Ihsan and I talked, one question kept repeating itself and repeating itself in my mind until I had to ask.
So why are we here trying to update the TMR documentary?
We did look at several different finance options for this project. We even were in talks with a billionaire investor out of Japan, but I just wasn't comfortable with any of those finance options, and I wasn't willing to give up ownership of the script. I think that most people probably would have sold out quickly for the money. What I was in it for was to use my talent and my art to inspire a change. And you and I've talked about it often, that voice. There's something that just told me not to give up the project just yet. Live to fight another day. That there was more to come.
That voice would once again speak loud and clear during an overseas trip that would take both Ihsan and Elisa by surprise and change the direction of this project, as well as the direction of their lives.
We did a lot of traveling to try and figure out who we were going to become, who were these new people that were going to emerge. We went overseas. I was trying to find a lot of my esoteric roots.
At that time, Ihsan and I really leaned on spiritual traditions and learning about spiritual practices like the Sudanese traditions, the Gnostic and Hebrew traditions, Egyptian traditions, Buddhist.
We went to the places to study the records and the text as an opportunity to practice in our lives what we felt sacred in our hearts.
We were on a retreat, and our oldest son had pointed out a lady in the back, and he was like, "Did you see that lady?"
There was a lady who was standing there, she had all white on. And she's in the back of the room against the wall by herself. And I remember turning around looking at her, and I was like, wow, she's just really standing out. She looks like something that you see out of a Bible, you know, a character out of a Bible. You kind of had to see her. She just looked like she was out of place in another time. She looks like an angel. I went up to her, and almost like she was waiting for us. I was like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I noticed you back there. And she was like, yeah, I noticed you too. And she said, I'm Deborah.
And we couldn't help but feel like we almost knew her, or like drawn to her in some way. She seemed to be able to notice things on another level, where it was almost a spiritual knowing. And she could see things that I guess other people couldn't see. She could see a shift in someone's spirit. She could notice things about a person's future that they didn't know.
We would sit down with her for dinner, and she seemed to already know what had happened in our past.
We went out with Deborah into what normally would be a really busy street, like a lot of traffic, a lot of people walking around.
And it was absolutely empty. There was no cars, no people. It was absolutely empty. The streets were dead quiet.
She went out into the middle of the street and started spinning in a circle. And she was like, look what I can do. Kind of like, I can clear the streets. I can clear a path. I could stop traffic.
And in the distance, we saw headlights of cars. It's the only car that we saw. It came up to us and stopped, and rolled down its window, and it was two elderly gentlemen. One of them looked just like Elisa's deceased dad. I think he was on the passenger side, and then the driver was like, hey, Deborah, how you doing? And seemed to know her.
Deborah spoke about a precipice where a person in their life had a moment where either they could continue forward down this path or turn back and go down the path that they were once going or already going. And so those moments in our lives, we're choosing the future, basically.
Also, at the time, Deborah, had told us that we have something important that we're supposed to do.
How we had a special mission, or how we were even maybe divinely sent to do something.
She was really one of the first people to explain to me the thing about being seated, or about having your purpose encoded in your DNA. She was articulating to me that if you're supposed to be somewhere in life and you're going down a certain trajectory, it's going to be a tragedy, it's going to be a heartbreak, it's going to be something of that nature that's going to crack your psyche open to allow you to go down the path you're truly supposed to go down.
In my case, in our case, she was speaking about the death of our daughter.
You, your daughter, and your wife, all before you arrived here, when you're planning your life's journey, decided that this had to be a scenario that happened for you to become the person that you were to become.
It does make it purposeful. I feel like it had a purpose. And I feel like pain in general has a purpose. I don't feel like it's somewhere you can live. I don't feel like it's somewhere you can live and then maybe be the best of yourself.
She did specifically tell us, I've come to help you guys get through this moment. There's something that you guys are supposed to do, and you can't lose sight of that. Through the pain, through the struggle, you can't lose sight of that. I remember talking to John Ray about it, and he called her an adept. And he said adepts are people who seem to appear to only the person that needs them at the moment.
Angels always come to righteous people. I want to say that again. Angels always come to righteous people. He will be helped by people that he don't even know. Even right now, there are invisible forces moving through the universe now that's going to help him move with this project.
And he said, was Deborah real? Maybe she wasn't. Maybe she was only real to you. Quick as Deborah came, she disappeared. Never to see her again. it was almost like the veil had been lifted. You know how we look at life and we're so in the moment. You know, everything that we're doing at that particular moment is so important, it's so urgent. That veil had been lifted and I could see life for what it really was, what it was really meant to be. And it was so liberating.
It was through learning about these traditions, through travels, that we were able to come out on the other side feeling like, no, there was more to give. Like we really did have a purpose. We really did have something to share with the world, a gift. And that maybe it was better to not dwell in that pain and look at the past, but maybe focus on the future.
They say all breakthroughs begin with an insight that inspires someone to create something new that the world has never seen. Either the insight is so profound, or the inspiration is so stirring, or the innovation is so dramatic that a significant result is achieved. The overseas trip turned out to be a breakthrough, not only for both Ihsan and Elisa, but also for myself. From the very beginning of the making of the original documentary, I couldn't help but to question some of the notions that Ihsan and Elisa had relayed to me. Were mysterious events, like the encounter with Deborah, part of a cosmic allegory which conveyed deeper meaning? Certainly an unbiased observer could label them as far-reaching. Up to this point in my life, I had only trusted the tangible, that which I could see with my own eyes and touch with my hands. But coming back together with this family to renew this documentary, and hearing these stories and witnessing how their experiences manifested in the lives of the Yorks, proved that there was something inexplicable, something beyond, that I could not explain, but could definitely feel, and more importantly, see, made real. I know now that there is something bigger than all of us, driving us to create a better path for humanity. As much as I tried to deny it at first, learning about oracles such as Deborah, a divine being who can prophesize, see into the future, and help guide us, that changed me. Seeing and hearing so many strange, unusual, and seemingly impossible stories take on the substance of reality in the lives of this special family were having an effect on me. What I have heard from Ihsan and Elisa over the course of this new project has opened my eyes to the proof that there is a universal power and possibly even a wiser intelligence surrounding and infusing us at all times, whether we acknowledge it or not. And this power acts upon us to inspire us. Making this documentary helped me see clearly how important this assignment is, how we can use the power of divine artistic creativity to change the course of history. Deborah was a turning point for Ihsan. There seemed to be an evolution in his thinking. However intent he had been on keeping a low profile, there was no avoiding the spotlight now. The times were urgent. Ihsan had gone through real soul-searching, and he knew he could offer a profile and a perspective that others could not.
I know that he has a mission. I know that. I know that he has been preordained to do what he's doing.
When we were doing the project back then, we hadn't experienced the world quite like it is now. You know, a lot has, changed since then. And I believe at certain moments in history, certain people are supposed to rise up and are appointed to rise up to help bring along a transition. Well, the world's in a crisis right now. It's like the old world is dying, but the new world hasn't been born yet. And right there, that's where you have the tension coming at. So then it's making us feel like we're experiencing a world that's dark and that's dangerous and disagreeable.
The chaos of the modern world can be overwhelming. Our senses and our psyche are being bombarded with negative imagery from all over the planet, on the evening news and through social media. It can lead to a feeling of helplessness. We simply don't know what we can do. We don't know how to help to make things better.
Now, there was a study done in the 1970s, and it showed this. It only takes a certain number of people to influence a given population. Do you know what that number is? The square root of 1%. This is where you and I come in at, okay? If that 1% can bring coherence and peace, it affects the entire civilization.
In science fiction stories, we accept the trope that one person, sent into the past, could, through action or inaction, irrevocably alter human history. We buy into the notion that one small action by one person could change the course of human events on a planetary scale. So why don't we believe in our own ability to change the world right here, right now?
There was a quote I remember reading. I think it was a book from the 17th century. So we're talking about a long time ago. It said, every determination of human will modifies nature, affects philosophy, and is written in the heavens. And I was like, what? And I memorized that. Every determination of human will modifies nature, affects philosophy, and is written in the heavens. So it only takes somebody that has the willpower, the strong desire to make that change where you can modify history, affect the heavens as it becomes written as philosophy.
Well-told stories have always fascinated and inspired humankind. From the flickering lights around a campfire to the flicker of 24 frames per second in a movie theater, certain stories speak to us on a deeper level than we may realize. They may be ancient stories dressed up in modern clothing. Subconsciously, we respond. Visual media especially speaks a persuasive language that bypasses consciousness and stirs up the conscious mind.
The characters in the film can actually influence people's psyche, and they can actually start to possess them. There was a psychologist named, Sandor Ferenczi, and he was a contemporary of Sigmund Freud. He calls this introjection. It's when we internalize someone else's characteristics or behaviors, and that's what happens when you watch a film and you walk away thinking about that character.
In the early 1900s, the Hungarian psychoanalyst Sandor Ferenczi developed his idea of introjection. The opposite of projection, as Sandor explains it, introjection is when people take experiences from the outside world and incorporate them into their ego, often subconsciously. Storytelling, and especially the visual arts like film, operate in this introjective way. When art is negative, it is subconsciously discouraging, disturbing, and depressing to those who experience it. But when art is positive, it becomes enlightening and inspiring. If you've ever walked out of a dark movie theater into the light and had a few moments of dizziness, shrugging off the 90 or so minutes of psychological bombardment in order to reorient yourself to the real world, then you've experienced introjection.
If someone was to create films that you actually start to see the better aspects of our nature, how do you think that would introject, or how do you think that would influence society? Our most advanced thinking now and in the future is not going to be in words or political slogans. It's going to be in pictures, because the visual dimension is the mystical dimension. That's the leading edge of awareness.
We are governed, our minds are modeled, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. These are the insights of Edward Bernays, an American theorist often referred to as the father of public relations, who understood the power of media.
If we could use these same insights and techniques and methods of practical application, then we can begin to introject those who have not been exposed to this higher level of wisdom. If you look at the movies that are most popular nowadays, they're usually movies about characters who have superpowers. These are huge hits because we all feel deep within our psyches that we have some sort of hidden or untapped power. This I learned from John Ray. He was one of the first people to help me to understand the power that I had within myself. And with that came responsibility.
He is an enigma, he's a mystic. For this kind of power that he has come from, this kind of tenacity. I mean, to be a young guy, to make a movie, to write, very rare, they're extremely rare. And coming out of where he came from, the pathology is such that the greatest killer of black men is black people. Now, in my day, the greatest killer of black people were white people in my day. It is important to have an image now, what I would call a makeover. And what this young man is doing is helping to supply a makeover. See, black kids, young ones, do not have a knowledge of themselves. They do not have a healthy self-concept. That's why they hurt each other. So see, when you look at what he's doing now with the movie and all of that, Ihsan is going to be able to impact millions of people by the work that he's doing. So when you ask me why this is so important, what he's going to do is redirect a generation of lost people and help them back on the right track.
What we hope to accomplish with our movement is really a reinstatement of faith. It's a reinstatement of faith within ourselves. It's a reinstatement of faith within our fellow human beings. And it's also faith in the direction of our purpose.
The House of York Media Production Company will be dedicated to advancing positive images, such as with Cinema Noir, a high-tech streaming platform that will inspire social change by redefining storytelling, changing stereotypes, and giving a voice to the voiceless. Cinema Noir will focus on films, dramatic series, documentaries, biographies, and science fiction by primarily black producers, filmmakers, and actors that not only entertains, but teaches and inspires. Cinema Noir will appeal to anyone who loves a good story and who wants to take part in building a bridge to a more positive future.
I really believe that there are people who still cherish true beauty. I believe there are people who believe in a world that's essentially good. And I also believe somewhere out there is still a place for hope in our culture.
There is a universal feeling that the world is in need of reason, poise, and balance. And this project is one that gives the human form dignity and hope. A lot of people want to believe again that we could still act together to build a better future. They want to believe in hope. Old-fashioned maybe, but some ideas never go out of style. In times of disillusionment and doubt, this project serves as a timely and affirming message, a vision painted with inspiring passion and genuine conviction. Given who they are and the life they have led, the Yorks stand as a living symbol of the possibility for greater harmony and progress. However, the path still winds upwards to accomplishment. For us, the end of this extraordinary saga is really just the beginning of another. We want to continue to make riveting entertainment that is also uplifting and enlightening. This is the start of a new movement, and we want to be an antidote to those whose agenda is misinformation, fear, destruction, and decline. It's a lot noisier, messier, and thus harder today to make this case, but it has to be made because it has never been more important.
So it's determined by whoever has the willpower to push their agenda forward. Our agenda is peace, it's coherence, it's love, It's hope. It's inspiration.